Waters.
Thank you, Chuck. And joining us right now is Congressman Carlos Curbelo. Good morning, Mr. Curbelo.
Bill, good morning to you and to Chuck from Washington.
Mr. Congressman.
Appreciate you joining us today. You scored a victory for climate change advocates in Congress recently with the defense spending bill and what you did in terms of your climate change caucus, this bipartisan group that you have put together with a number of other congressmen concerned that we're not paying much attention in the federal government to climate change these days. Tell us about this victory.
That's right, Bill. We have many bases in the country and really throughout the world, like Naval Air Station Key West, that are on the water, and in NAS Key West's case, just about at sea level. And obviously, they're vulnerable to sea level rise. And this is something that Secretary Mattis, our Secretary of Defense, is on the record expressing concerns over the fact that some of our bases are vulnerable to climate change and specifically to sea level rise. So there was a required report in the National Defense Authorization Act that would ask the military to list the 10 most vulnerable bases in each service when it comes to environmental vulnerabilities. Now, we had a colleague here from Pennsylvania who decided that this should not be in the NDAA and filed an amendment to strike this report from the bill. And for the first time ever, the Climate Solutions Caucus really made an effort to organize, to engage all of the members, the 24 Republicans and 24 Democrats. And we voted almost unanimously. Only one member did not vote with the rest of the caucus to keep that report in the NDAA bill and to highlight the threat that climate change and sea level rise represents to all of us, but specifically to our men and women in uniform who deserve the best and deserve facilities that are resilient and can help them perform their training and all their other operations. So this was a confidence booster. I think this gives us great momentum to continue building bipartisan support for reasonable, rational, fact-based, science-based policies when it comes to the environment, to climate change, and to sea level rise.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, recently also you've secured several grants for Key West International Airport, several $1 million going into the airport. What's that about?
The last grant was $6.5 million, and it helps local authorities continue improving and enhancing the airport there. We know that Key West International Airport is a lifeline to the residents, to the economy of Key West, but also to the rest of the Florida Keys. So the more we can do to support operations there, again, to make that to protect those that live near it from noise pollution, the more we can do, the better. And these grants, Bill, are a result of a lot of times people hear in the news Congress passed an omnibus appropriations bill or some kind of spending package, and there's so much in it that people really don't know what it all entails, where those funding packages, that's where these grants come from. So they are important. That's why that's another issue where we continue to try to build bipartisan support here for a more regular budget process here to get rid of this almost permanent threat of government shutdowns, because when we have shutdowns, when we don't have predictable funding in government, it's much harder for those funds to flow to communities like ours that so desperately need them.
Okay. Meanwhile, the National Flood Insurance Program is up for reauthorization this year, and recently a bunch of flood insurance bills passed through the House Financial Services Committee. You've expressed some concern about this. Tell us what your concerns are.
Yeah, my concerns are the premium increases, some of the rules they want to change on grandfathering. Look, there are two problems here, Bill. Number one, yes, the National Flood Insurance Program is insolvent. It is running a deficit every year. That has to change, and we have to figure that out, because like any other government program, like any household of in our country, the FFP should be able to balance its books and run a solvent operation. The other issue we have is that there are areas like the Florida Keys and Tampa Bay area as well, and many others throughout the country that are facing a very serious affordable housing crisis. The cost of living is just high. We know we're having growth in the Florida Keys. We have full employment, and that's a good thing. But the problem is that a lot of small businesses can't find people to work. So this is a major challenge we have, and we have to balance these two issues that we're facing, the insolvency of the program, while at the same time being sensitive to areas like the Florida Keys. So something that I continue insisting upon, and I know it's going to be tough, but I'd like to see NFIP protections extended to not just primary homes, but also commercial properties and rental properties. We know for a fact that would help alleviate the affordable housing challenge we have in the Florida Keys. Now, if we can't get that, we at least really want to slow down the rate of premium increases, because we know it will only exacerbate the problem we have. So the chairman of the committee and the chairman of the subcommittee are making modifications to the bill. They're making concessions. They're listening to us. But I don't know yet that I'll be able to support the final product.
2 years ago, we saw the Biggert Waters Act implemented, basically trying to, right the ship for the National Flood Insurance Program, but it had a number of unintended consequences, particularly for affordability. And Congress has been working to correct those, but does this new package help or hurt that?
Well, it's part of the same debate, and I wasn't here when Biggert Waters passed. It was a bipartisan bill, but it was a bipartisan bill that was insensitive to areas like the Florida Keys. It really would have pushed people out of their homes or rendered their properties worthless. So thankfully, a year later, Congress passed what they call a patch to soften the blow somewhat. People still saw premium increases and surcharges, but it was more reasonable. And now we continue trying to move towards the solvency of the NFIP, but those of us who come from the areas that would be most affected are pushing back a little, saying, sure, we want to get to solvency, but we can't do it by putting these onerous premium rate increases and other fees on our constituents, because it's just not fair. Add to the fact, Bill, that in Florida, we have gone a long way since 1992 towards strengthening our building codes, making sure that our properties are resilient, and thus limiting risk. So we, a donor state to the NFIP, should especially not be saddled with the burden of bringing this program to solvency. The risk should be spread out more. We have been calling for better maps. The Florida delegation has, because we know there are many other properties in the country which sit on floodplains and yet are not part of the NFIP. So all of that has to be part of the solution, not simply drastically raising premiums on those who are already in the program.
We'll look forward to talking to you more on this as the National Flood Insurance Program, nears that time when it has to be reauthorized. There's just no way around that. What about bringing in the private market into flood insurance?
Well, that's something that's also in this bill, and I think that can work. And I've spoken to Commissioner Heather Carruthers and others in the Florida Keys, and they're also open to this, so long as those private plans are strictly regulated. We want to prevent a couple things. Number one, we want to make sure that in the event of a flood, these companies are actually paying and they don't leave their policyholders hanging. And number two, we want to make sure that these companies get certified by the state, that they are going to be good players in this field. There's been a lot of fraud when it comes to the private market. So that's something else that we're looking at very closely. But certainly, if the private markets do come in and don't just cherry pick, but try to build good risk pools, it can also work, and it can also help alleviate the strain, the burden on the NFIP. That's something that's a major priority for Chairman Hensarling and for Chairman Duffy, who are the main committee chairman and the subcommittee chairman, respectively, that deal with this issue. And we want to help them advance that cause so long as these companies, as we have guarantees that these companies are going to be good actors and worthy replacements of the NFIP.
Congressman Carlos Curbelo, thank you for joining us. Look forward to talking to you again next week.
Okay, you all have a good week. Thanks, Bill.
You too. Bye now.